Welcome to the Executive Insights podcast brought to you by AWS. My name is Richard Taylor from AWS, and I'm delighted to be joined by Roger Premo, Global Head of Strategy for IBM. Roger, great to have you.
Fantastic to be here. Thanks, Richard.
IBM have been on their own AI transformation journey as of late. Tell me some more about that and how that's sort of shaped your approach to working with your customers.
Yeah, I mean, we have a strategy we call Client Zero, which is being our own best customer of this technology to both improve our business, but provide feedback to our product teams. And with the belief that if it can work for a company as big and complex as IBM, it can work for practically anyone. And it's been a journey that we've been on for a number of years. We are working on what is now called Agentic, which we were kind of at one point was just transformer model doing tool calling for several years now. And it's been this journey that's begun primarily in our back office. We run a highly scaled back office. You know, those use cases have proven ROI. We're now expanding it across the business. So it's been a tremendous journey that's really changed how we operate. And I think the other thing it's done is it meant that every single IBMer touches Gen AI in their daily work. So the interface by which I do HR work or IT service is a conversational interface. And I almost never see the applications that live behind it that the AI is actually calling behind the scenes.
I'm curious how leadership or sort of group leadership thought about setting ROI for your own transformation. Are there intangible metrics that you look at as well as maybe more tangible ones? How did you set the scene for that?
It began from a leadership goal. We became very committed from our CEO on down to become the most productive company in the world. So we knew from a benchmark perspective where we stood. Today, that journey, which is AI paired with process redesign, we're going to end this year $4.5 billion more productive than we began the journey 3 or 4 years ago. So it is the ROI is real external audited financials that tell the world we are on that journey to be the world's most productive company.
Yeah. And the intangibles, how do you maybe measure that from an employee perspective? And
we just, like I said, every IBMer touches Gen AI. We've done a series of things. Our Gen AI toolkit is Watson X. We've done what we call the Watson X challenge internally so that people experience this technology. And then we also, of course, like I said, the conversational interface to how you get your work done inside of IBM is now pervasive. So I do think that this is just part of the future professional toolkit for everybody. You have to embrace this technology and learn how to adopt it. And if we don't figure out how to work it into our daily workflows, we're missing an opportunity to improve our businesses, but improve each and every one of our personal skills.
I agree, absolutely. How did you find driving adoption, if that's the right term? How did you make IBMers lean in and start using the technology in the right way and the productive way?
In some of these cases, if it's IT service, we really did turn off the traditional methods. And we found that we could get an equivalent service experience, much faster returns with that kind of Gen AI based interface. So first of all, we made it kind of mandatory in a set of things, but at the same time, we had things, like I said, the Watson X challenge, where we're asking people to experiment. But then from our CEO, he's led this. He does office hours with the company. And I think back to that toolkit, he said, learning how to prompt this technology is part of how you interact with it. And his point was simply, this is for his all hands for all the employees. It's prompt it once. And if it gives you the right answer, fantastic. But if it doesn't, try a different prompt. And if you try that for the third time, it doesn't work, take the time to fill out the feedback in the UI back to the development team so they can understand where it didn't work. And that speeds the development process so that for the next IBMer, it will be better than it was for you. So this notion of really kind of getting comfortable using the technology, but also understanding that this innovation can move so fast if we provide it the right feedback to learn from.
The mandatory piece is fascinating because, like, I know some organizations are a bit concerned about, telling people to do certain things, but that balance maybe across the organization is the key to getting it right. And you mentioned as well that technology is changing so quickly and the space is evolving so rapidly, and Agentic obviously is much of the conversation today. Yeah. Is there a right and a wrong way to think about deploying agents in an organization?
Yeah, I think there is a set of emerging patterns. And so, my day job is I run strategy for IBM. And in my role, we've been studying kind of lessons from the leaders, both our internal use cases and market examples of what really works in the adoption of this technology. And just to click through it, I mean, five things kind of stand out. One is this notion of the leadership the leadership from top to bottom, what we just went through with the organization. The second, we talked about purposeful processes. It's the selection of the right processes with the intent to truly re-engineer them and going into them with eyes wide open of both the potential, but how difficult it will be. And so, I look at some of the organizations that have, selected these hundreds, sometimes thousands of different individual point use cases. You can't possibly have an organizational commitment to reshape yourself if you're doing it in that kind of level of experimentation mode. So that purposeful design of it. And I mentioned before, there's so many places when we study it across the market. What's really interesting is there's not a pattern by industry nor country. There are leaders in every space because practically every company has to develop code. So these proven patterns exist already. And go learn the skills in your organization, the change management, the technical architecture, how you handle things like identity, data security. My advice to companies is go learn that in spaces where there will be ROI at the end of the journey, rather than burdening an experiment with solving the data security problem simultaneously. It's just too hard. The next thing I'd say, and IBM had been on this journey for a while, is just the data journey. Data quality had been valuable in so many companies, but a lot of initiatives that the ROI of that investment to really upgrade their data, connect it, make sure it really worked together, that the ROI didn't close prior to Gen AI. Now there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So now there is a business case for that data quality journey. It becomes a prerequisite to do this well. The next thing I say is just about technical architecture. I think we have to look across the entire technology environment. So if it's partners like AWS, there'll be so many of the agents they'll run in those environments, but they'll also run in applications, they'll run in data centers, they'll run at the edge. And we know that if we feed agents more data from more places, and we give them the potential to call tools and take action across more places, they'll create more value. But that means we need to rethink architectures, access, identity. So it takes some real platform engineering to tackle this. And the last thing I'd say that kind of gets at maybe even the biggest heart of your question is we've codified something we call the Agentic development lifecycle. And there is a very different way. There's a much more design of the metrics and evaluations of what I want from these agents. And there's much more of an experimentation optimization method of creating these use cases. And so we published it together with Anthropic. I think it's available online. I think it's good advice because I think one of the failure modes is taking the traditional SDLC and try and force fit it into agents. And it simply doesn't work as well as a kind of more eval and optimization experimentation method.
You mentioned there's no differentiation when you look across industries and countries globally as to how organizations are approaching this. Everyone can get advantage in different places. Do you see certain use cases where customers are winning more quickly, if you like? Are there places where you can get more return and time for value?
So many people read the MIT study earlier this summer of 95% of companies aren't getting value from this. And I think a lot of people took a little comfort in that. I think you got to look at the 5% that have and say, it is possible. And so the message is every company is eligible. It is possible for every company. But then building those muscles in your organization of the employees that are ready for it, the technical teams that know how to experiment and innovate with Agentic, that gives you the fluency in this technology to then take on these use cases of what we're calling breaking the ceiling of the new business models, the new revenue streams, the new product lines that we should be creating with this technology. There are companies that jump straight to that break the ceiling if they really had intent and vision.
Yeah.
But often it's difficult in different domains to foresee what that will be. So start in the places where there'll be value, build your capabilities there, and then take on these places where there'll be true differentiation.
And you mentioned there, obviously, there's some struggles that organizations face as they approach this, but to try and break that ceiling, I love that approach. You mentioned employees being ready, or like embracing where employees are ready. Where do you see organizations, again, trying to take employees on the cultural journey or maybe the capability journey? What's the balance between those two? Technically being able to use AI in the right way, but also culturally knowing how to and run that kind of experimentation mindset you talked about before.
I think this is one of the questions where I think it depends by function. There are different types of development where if I think of code maintenance, modernization, things like that, where there's a proven pattern, those can go at much higher productivity. There are other places where you're in an innovation loop with a client where you need their human input and to understand. So we have a range of different productivities. And I'd say within IBM, we're seeing tremendous transformative change in some domains and kind of material, but still valuable change in others. And we want to celebrate the leaders that figure out how to guide that path, because I don't know that anybody's put together the real point of view of things like what does the software engineering organization of the future look like? Yep. It's I think the fog of the future is a little too thick now, but we try and celebrate the teams that are figuring it out more than others.
Yeah, raising those up, that lean into that experimentation. And you mentioned data as well before, the importance of that data strategy. And it's always been important, but I think Agentic or AI is almost impossible without the right data architecture underneath. Where do you see customers struggling there? Like, what's the biggest challenge and headwind they face when it comes to data in an organization?
I think it's just such a massive topic. I'd say I give you maybe answer it from the IBM perspective. We're lucky enough that as part of some of our own kind of transformation, we'd started this data journey a little bit ahead of the AI journey. And we started thinking about all the views we have of an employee, all the views we have of a product, all the views we have of a customer, so that we could start unifying that across the different systems we have. And I suspect for different organizations, they'll have different things that are kind of these, I think that the term now is data products, really thinking about how do you product manage the key data assets such that you put as much investment into making that data ready for use in traditional analytics and these new AI use cases, put as much effort into product managing high quality data for those key domain areas as you would to product engineering in a new product line. And I think that notion of data product management is kind of the mindset we took, and I think it's good advice for practically any organization as well. You have to really put human effort into thinking about what does good look like? What are my end use cases? And then there's a feedback loop of data cleaning, data integration, data simplification to get there.
You've also talked about hybrid cloud being key to the future, whatever that might be, that foggy future you mentioned of AI and Agentic. Talk me a bit about that when it comes to on-premise, cloud, edge, et cetera, and where you see that evolving to take advantage of AI.
Yeah. So if you look at the technology environments of most large organizations in the world, they're in the cloud, often they're in the data center. We've got new edge coming online. They acquired a company who's on a different cloud. So they end up with this heterogeneous technology environment. And an IBM strategy, which is a hybrid cloud strategy, the acquisition of Red Hat for IBM was a bet that hybrid state would endure, and it has. And that there's open source technologies are emerging as a way that creates a way you can do basically your DevOps platform across that heterogeneity to take advantage of the unique differentiation it has, but also abstract away the complexity that you don't need from that. And so we really are majoring on this notion of, we call it hybrid by design, but platform engineering across those environments. So you can have one way to develop, operate, comply, secure that environment. And when we do the math on that, empirically, that has a 3 times higher ROI on innovation dollars spent than doing it in a siloed way. We're just at the front end of quantifying that for Agentic, but the pattern is very clear that there are so many Agentic use cases that if you think of an agent with the peripheral vision, the sales agent will be better if they know what the pricing team in finance is doing. And that is true for I won't go through every permutation of how you can do that, but we're seeing that pattern play out. So I think the 3X it was the foundation of the thinking of why we acquired Red Hat and why we advocate, hybrid cloud platform thinking. I think Agentic is going to blow through that 3X, and we're in the process of trying to quantify that right now.
In your experience of going through transformation with IBM, how's that changed maybe approaches to governance frameworks? Like, how do you think about making sure you've got the right controls in place when it comes to either building and scaling agents or rolling out new products, or the data angle that you talked about before? How important is governance going to be moving forward?
To preamble it, it is fundamentally important. And I think so much of what is either necessitated by regulators, especially in the EU, but I think we'll see more of it around the world. And if it's the things you want to do, it's not just because you're regulated to, it's the right thing to do to make sure that you have the right controls in your business. Then I get to the hybrid statement, which is, we need one process and toolkit in order to do this across the business. Because if you have to go to the regulator and say, I've got this application provider and it's a governance tool here, and you have to roll that together and be able to testify that I am compliant. It's an impossible task. So you do have to think about hybrid by design in terms of the process and tooling to get that done. The failure mode I've seen is if we try and bolt on governance and standards after we've developed the agentic application, that's nearly impossible. It has to come from the ground floor and build into it because it's fundamental to how these agents perform.
Yeah, absolutely. And are you working with your customers' boards? What role do boards have in either shaping this regulation or working with the regulators? How do they get prepared to be ready for some of this governance?
What we've done inside of IBM had been, going back to the original Watson, had been a leader on AI ethics for over a decade now, because we started to see these things. If it's a hiring decision, a loan application, credit worthiness, if the AI amplifies the bias that's already in our data, we need to have something that is the check against that. So we'd had real leadership on that. I think it is what we talked about. What we've set up inside of IBM is our own AI ethics board that looks at different use cases, understands what is the nature of this use case, what is the risk around it, what are the governance guardrails that we need to put around it to make sure that it fits our standards. So I think the main answer to your question is we're helping clients think through, how do you create an AI ethics board and governance process to comply with these regulations? Eventually it gets to that board level, but I think if we don't have a team that's already built their process of what they're going to report out to that board, you're not going to have something satisfactory to talk to your board about.
Yeah. And curious as well, you mentioned there, building the right frameworks and getting the right people on board, et cetera, using the right teams across the organization. Were there any blockers or challenges you came across early in the journey?
Yes. I think now we've progressed so far, but I think first of all, there's this intuition. Like if you think of a digital use case, technology leaders, we all have an intuition about what is the shape of a problem that is suitable for digital. I think for myself, for many of our leaders, I think building that intuition around what is a problem that generative AI and now agentic could tackle took a little while. So first is there's just efficacy of the use case itself. Are we designing for something that can really work? Then I think you get to blockers on cost. Like I said, you can inadvertently, if you send the eval framework to, I want the perfect answer, and it keeps working until it gets there, you could have agentic back and forth that breaks the bank and your ROI is broken because the spend you put in is so massive. So I think as you go through these, we hit these blockers on, does it work? What does it cost? The data challenge, the security, the identity security challenge. We've had to, as an example, inside of IBM software, we're acquisitive in the market. We've had to accelerate the integration of the identity systems. So we're on one identity system across acquired properties, because if I want agents to converse with each other, they both have to have a single source of identity to say that agent I'm chatting with has permissions to have this conversation. So there's a long list of blockers, but that's why I advocate the back office ones. If you're going to plow through all those challenges and learn all those lessons, we try and document them, we try and guide our clients through them, but the reality is that everybody's going to have some unique pains to their business. If we start with a use case, we know that there's real value at the end of it. It creates the motivation to plow through those. So many times when we started with the exotic, interesting use case that's more speculative, those blockers are the things that killed it and led to the 95% failure rate. Each one of those has, a 10% mortality rate on the AI use case, and you add that up across many blockers, and that's why you get to things like the 95%. So start with ones that have big value, so you have the organizational will to plow through them.
Proving out the hypothesis, as you said, even if how do we know it's the right thing to be building and the use case is the right one, and testing that idea. Just curious, how high did you raise the guardrails? Because typically organizations are saying you can't do this here, or red tape says you can't go that far. Did you find yourself having to let people go further? And where did you put the sort of bar in to stop experimentation?
I'd say, first of all, we took a kind of a de-averaged view. So there's a set of use cases internally. If it's internal knowledge management, search discovery, like those types of things are low risk for the business. Those things need less of a guardrail. In the HR space, we absolutely had to have strong security and guardrails to make sure that the conversational interface doesn't inadvertently share my private data with somebody else or vice versa. So I think the answer is really, it's a little unsatisfying, but it depends. But we had, that is part of the explicit conversation that we take on with the development team and the AI ethics board of what is the nature of this use case? What risks does it have? So that if we apply one uniform standard to those use cases, I'll either take way too much risk or I'll burden simple use cases with way too much overhead. So you have to kind of de-average it and think situationally about each one. Ebb and
flow as you're looking at those kind of situations. Makes sense. So you've clearly learned a huge amount on this transformation, obviously working with all of your customers as well. Where do you advise organizations who are thinking about going on an AI journey or a transformation? Where do you advise them to start? What frameworks have been valuable for IBM?
I think the major thing is I sincerely believe we are seeing evidence of this kind of escape velocity of the agentic companies. I sincerely believe that this is something where the advantage compounds. So we're seeing examples in our business where now we have CEOs or general managers of our business that can look at, because employees are using this technology, because the functional base is built out, now they can do synthetic insights about how do I make the business better across these different domains. So we just see no end to this compounding advantage. So my main advice is that the 95% can't be something that makes you comfortable. There's incredible urgency because I think this technology has broader applicability, goes deeper into processes, and will happen faster than any disruption we've seen before. So my main advice is urgency. And then if you talk about those factors, right, once again, just like if it's leadership, purposeful processes, the data readiness journey, the technical architecture, the ADLC of how you create this, you have to start really taking those efforts. And you have to confront the things. If it was, we had 100 different use cases that we're not even sure if these are going to actually work, we have to confront those things that got in the way now and take a sober look in the mirror of saying, if I haven't succeeded so far, why not? And really push through it, because whether it's a fundamental competitive disadvantage or actually being out of business because of this technology, I think in industry, because this applies in every industry, I think we're going to start seeing a material advantage to the leaders in agentic adoption breaking away from their competitors who have not done it yet.
And urgency is a great message to leave behind, because it's a choice for the organization as well, right? There's a choice if you move fast, or you can adopt, be a fast mover or a fast follower, et cetera. And so it's a great place to give that final advice to customers that speed is most important.
It is. Speed with like a really tenacious look at what's getting in our way and a solutions-oriented mindset to say we must push through this, because success in the first processes will make the likelihood of success in the next 100 much higher.
Awesome. Roger, thank you so much for joining me today. Really insightful conversation, and thanks for dropping by the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.